I'm Beth.
And I'm Chad Meeks. And Beth and I have been going to Vineyard since 1999, and we've also been married for 15 years.
Well, I think like most couples, we were crazy in love and taking on the world and ready to settle down and have a family and all the great things that you have, all these feelings that you have on your wedding day, and that's what you're living life on, I guess, in the first year or so.
I've known Beth since high school. We used to work at a restaurant together, went away to college, and when I came back, we started dating in '94. And we dated for 5 years before we got engaged and got married. I knew that she was the one. We had taken it seriously, and when we got married, I was positive that that was it. Everything was going to be happy and blissful, and the first 7-8 years of dating and being married were great. I, and probably Beth will tell you the same, started living self-centered lives. I looked at the world and asked it, what could it do for me, instead of what could I do for others, what could I do for my wife.
And so eventually, living self-centered lives is going to take a toll on the marriage, and it did. So in 2006, we found ourselves separated and looking at a divorce in our future, and it was a kick in the stomach. And never in a million years did I think that I was going to be divorced. God revealed to me that He did not want me to leave the marriage in the state it was in. He didn't want me to give up. He wanted me to continue to work on my marriage and be open to the relationship and repairing the relationship. And that was hard because I didn't want to. I didn't want to be obedient. It was easier to give up.
Unknown to me, Beth and I were leading two different paths, but they had the one common element, which was God. Beth was praying and calling out and getting a very specific message from God, whereas I was ignoring Him. And my best description is that I had to hit rock bottom. I thought my marriage was over for sure. I found myself living alone. Saw my son a couple days a week, which when you're a loving father, a couple days a week is not enough. You want to be with your son all the time. And when I hit there, that's when I prayed to God. I just said to Him, hey, I don't know my way out of here. And shortly after that, I started talking to Beth again and showing my interest of working things out, not knowing that she had had this specific message from God that as long as we were still married, she was going to work on it.
When God takes you to a place that you just can't get up from, and you have no other choice but to rely on Him. You have no other crutch. You have nothing else that really gets you up or gives you strength. And then you see all of a sudden this warmth coming from a person that you haven't felt like you've known for a year or so. And I don't know. I think I'm still stunned sometimes by what God did in our life. If you had told me in 2006 that we would still be married in 2015, I would have told you you were crazy.
Our marriage is stronger now than it even was when we first got married, that blissful newlywed type. And even though we experience more stresses and struggles, we're the parents of a teenager, we both work, we have the tools now to work through those struggles. We still have our imperfections, our faults, our arguments like every other couple, but they last a lot shorter, and we forgive a lot quicker because we know where we've been before, and God brought us back. I know there's people out there that are struggling just like we are. This is not a perfect church. We all have our problems, and I can assure you that we were on the brink of losing everything, and almost 19, 20 years later, we're stronger than we've ever been.
Well, what a great story of God's transformation. Well, good afternoon. Thank you for coming. It's good to see you, especially if you're a new person or visiting us. If one of these long winter's nights you're looking for a good movie, try Quartet. It's great, despite a couple of times when the language is a bit difficult. The set is a grand English country house that's been turned into a home for retired musicians. One of the long-standing residents is played by Tom Courtenay. He's horrified that Maggie Smith, the Maggie Smith character, is coming to live there. Maggie wants to be friends, but Tom is unaccountably angry and brooding and will have none of it. This may be a spoiler for you, but it turns out that they were once married for just 9 hours. A long time ago, they'd lived together for a year. Then Maggie went on a brief working trip to Europe. When she returned, they got married. She wanted an honest marriage, so she felt she needed to tell Tom that when she was away, she was briefly involved with another fellow. Tom was deeply hurt. He couldn't manage the news or forgive the deed and walked out on the infant marriage. The film, you'll laugh or you'll cry all the way through, is about the painful relationships between these two and a couple of their friends. Michael Gambon, who played Professor Dumbledore in the Harry Potter films, also makes a memorable appearance. He's the loud, domineering organiser amongst the residents. All of us are dealing with difficult relationships of one kind or another. If it's not the person we're sitting next to, or should be sitting next to, it will be someone who leaps to mind when we think about our relationships. Perhaps we're experiencing struggles like Chad and Beth talked about in the video. Some of us have a dominating person or boss at work or college who's crushingly difficult to work with. You may have a child or a parent whom you love with your whole being, but your relationship with him is hurting or it's broken. You may live alone and be struggling with developing and sustaining relationships. It's not all that long since Christmas, a time that brought home to some of us how unhealthy our relationships seem to be. Or perhaps you've just fallen in love and you want to do all you can to keep that relationship healthy. In this series of weekend talks about being transformed by God, I'm glad that we can take some time to talk about relational health and the part that God plays in our relationships. Last week, my wife celebrated her 43rd wedding anniversary. This week, I learnt that it was very important for me to look after that marriage. For the most recent issue of Time magazine tells me that if I look after my relationship with my wife, I might live longer. Or maybe it will just seem longer. In any case, we all know that our relationships have an influence on how we feel about ourselves and how we feel about our life. So our question today is, how can we maintain healthy relationships so that they contribute positively to our lives rather than destroy us? There are 3 little things to say before we launch into our topic. One is that whatever relationship we happen to be talking about, marriage or children or parents or friends, the principles can generally be applied to other relationships. The second thing to say is that I'm assuming that a healthy relationship is one in which each person feels respect and care and is able to flourish. The third thing to say is that the Bible, from beginning to end, is packed with clear guidance on relational health. It's the big theme of the whole book. So to simplify things, we'll take our biblical bearings from just one part of it, the Gospel of Mark. That's because, although Mark is about Jesus, one of the subplots is about the relationship between Jesus and his followers and between his followers and each other. Some years ago, before I began going for regular medical checkups, I made an appointment to see my physician. I was experiencing considerable pain in my back and side. I thought a vacation would fix it. But 2 weeks away by the seaside made no difference whatsoever. Obviously, I had some painful, incurable, deadly disease. The doctor poked and prodded and took samples of all kinds of things. On my return visit, the doctor sat me down and said this: "Graham, there's nothing wrong with you, but if you don't lose weight, get fit and do less, you won't make it. From that day, I changed my lifestyle. My physical life depended on it. From what I read in the Bible and from what I can learn from experts on relationships, it seems that we can safeguard our relational health in much the same way that we safeguard our physical health. We need a fitness regime. We need regular checkups. And we need to know how to handle emergencies. Let's look at each of those. So first, a relational health regime. The most important tool for safeguarding our physical health is not wearing a panic button, or knowing the shortest route to the emergency centre, or how to dial 911. The Time magazine article I mentioned a moment ago tells me that it's lifestyle medicine that's the key. It's the day-to-day lifestyle decisions that bring the best and longest-term physical health. It's whether we have it with or without fries. It's whether we walk the dog once a week or every day. And the same is true with our relationships. So that's the first thing to say about relational health. It requires time, is the word to write in there, time. Willard Harley knows a lot about relational health. He's a clinical psychologist who spent decades helping couples in their relationships. In the early years of his career, he found that, like most professionals involved in marital therapy, he was failing to save marriages. Then he began asking couples questions. What would it take for you to be happily married again? Over and over again, they said this. For us to be in love again. Couples would tell him that they had married each other because they'd found each other irresistible. They were in love. But Harley found that by the time they came to his office, they'd lost that love and feeling. So he knew that if he was going to save these relationships, he'd have to go beyond improving communication or resolving their conflicts. He'd have to figure out how to restore love. So he began asking couples what it would take for each other to feel in love with each other again. And he discovered that a man and a woman have a number of basic needs that must be met in a marriage for the relationship to be healthy. Can you guess what was on the top of the list of a woman's needs? Oh, I'm very sorry. Well, tell him it's affection. The second one's conversation, talking. Number 3, honesty and openness. Financial support, and the last one is family commitment. And what do you think Harley discovered was the number 1 need for the men? You can say it out loud. Sexual fulfillment. Tell her. Then comes recreational companionship, watching the ball game together, an attractive wife, domestic support, admiration. You're the most wonderful husband in the world. And you can read all about that in the book, His Needs, Her Needs. But here's the key for today. To make all this work, for a couple to meet each other's needs, Harley discovered it takes time. But how much time does a marriage relationship need to be healthy? Well, Harley discovered that couples need to spend 15 hours a week together if they're going to have relational health. And that doesn't count sleeping together. I'm reminded that I once spent a great deal of time each week trying to convince my wife to marry me. It shouldn't surprise me that I need to be spending the same amount of time to keep her. Our children also need time if we're going to have good relationships with them. I heard of a mother of a teenage girl who ran away from home. The mother didn't run away from home, the girl ran away from home. The mother was asked what she would do differently if she had her time over again. Here's what she said. From the very beginning, I wouldn't interrupt, no matter how long she took. So she would keep talking to me when she became a teenager. In the Gospel of Mark, there's a tiny phrase that you can miss, even in the original Greek. It draws attention to what we've just been talking about. Early in the story of Jesus, he calls a number of individuals to be his disciples or followers. Other folk have been crowding around as well. Then Mark says he appointed 12 to be with him. You wouldn't think anything about that sentence until you see the very same idea come up a few pages later. Jesus casts out some evil spirits from a man. The man responds by asking Jesus if he can be with him. That's the exact phrase again. And those who write fat books about these things tell us that Mark is saying that the fundamental aspect of being a Christian or a follower of Jesus is being with Jesus. And incredibly, in the Gospel of Mark, the followers of Jesus are always with Jesus. Well, there are a couple of occasions when he's not with them. That's the couple of occasions they go out in their fishing boats alone without him and nearly drown. Interesting. That then is the first and most important thing to say about relational health. Whether the relationship in question is with our wife or husband or child or parent or friend or colleague or Jesus, it will take time to be healthy. The next part of our relational health regime follows immediately on from this. Number 2, deep commitment. Let's stay in Mark's Gospel for a moment. It's the middle section of Mark that's important to us. It's a section dedicated to Jesus' teaching on relationships between himself and them and between the followers with each other. Here's one of the things that Mark has Jesus say. If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. Back then, if you had taken up your cross, you would be on your way to your crucifixion. Your life was already in the hands of someone else. Jesus is saying that our relationship with him depends on our profound commitment to him. His commitment has been in giving his life for us. Our commitment in the relationship is to give our life to him. Interestingly, in Mark, Jesus goes on to say those who want to save their life will lose it. And those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. Relational health involves an all or nothing commitment. It's not possible to have a healthy marriage and a bit on the side, even in your mind. Our children's well-being depends on our consistent commitment to them. We may express our relationship with friends differently from what we would to a spouse or a child or parents, but we're not a friend one day and not the next. I heard of a father whose son had been sentenced to jail. In a conversation, a neighbour commented that he'd heard that the lad had gotten into trouble. The father admitted the sad fact. The neighbour then mentioned that it wasn't the first time, and that the lad seemed to be going from bad to worse. And again, the father had to admit that was the case. Finally, the neighbour offered some advice. Do you know what I'd do if he's my son? I'd put him smartly out the door, shut it and turn the key once and for all. The father agreed. But then he said this, but you see, I can't, because he's my son. That's the kind of commitment that God offers to us, and the kind of commitment our relationships require if they're going to be healthy. In daily life, commitment boils down to ordinary things, being dependable in what we say, turning up on time, meeting deadlines, completing tasks, answering emails and calls, though not when we're supposed to be talking with our significant other. Which leads to the next thing about healthy relationships. Number 3, communication. Let me tell you about Mavis and Drew. They'd been married for 20 years. Both spoke separately to their pastor, pouring out their hurts. Then the pastor saw both of them together. In the meeting, he tried to convey to each what the other had said to him. He told Drew of a long-standing personal difficulty Mavis had in their marriage. Guess what Drew said? I had no idea. Mavis and Drew had failed to communicate about a relatively minor matter that had become a major obstacle to a healthy relationship. Another couple, Kathy and Jim, went to see a counsellor on a number of occasions. Kathy would sit there talking through tears. She was desperately trying to open up her heart so the difficulties they're experiencing could be laid bare and they could be dealt with. But Jim refused to talk. All he could say was, we seem to be going okay. I don't see any real problems. A year later, they were separated. If only they had communicated. And if we're going to have healthy relationships with our children, we need to communicate with them, leaning forward to show interest, making eye contact without staring or letting our eyes wander, avoiding an expression of shock or judgment, waiting patiently through times of silence and tears, leading the conversation. What happened next? Tell me what you mean. Reflecting statements. You must feel what sounds like you're saying. If you have teenage children, you'll know this is not easy. When our daughter was leading a youth group, she chose Midnight Fridays as her peak communication time with us. If our relationship with God is going to be healthy, we need to communicate with Him. If you were to read through the Gospel of Mark, Jesus and his followers are constantly communicating. They're talking with each other. The bottom line for us is that just as we need to be talking to maintain a human relationship, so we need to be talking and listening to God if we expect to have a healthy relationship with Him. Number 4 in our relational health regime is appreciation or respect. When I was a little fellow, horses were just on the way out. I didn't like horses very much. They were large and very strong and scary. Around the farm, there were various carts and trolleys that were used with horses, but they'd become useless with the coming of the tractor. So we made hammer handles out of the wooden spokes of the wheels, and we chopped up the rest of these things for firewood. These days, I suppose we could get thousands of dollars for the things that we once saw as no value. Nothing about those carts or those wheels had changed. It's just that we changed the way that we valued them. Here's the point. Appreciation and value is something we decide to give something, regardless of appearance or use. Now think about people in your family. Think how you'd feel if when you got home from work you were treated differently from usual. The red carpet was rolled out. You were escorted to your comfortable chair and given your favourite drink. The children, they hung on your every word. Your friend or husband or wife brought you your tablet so that you could read. Well, here's something. What if you did that for someone in your family? But you're thinking, the person that I've married, indeed the children I've got, don't deserve that kind of treatment. Well, nor do any of us. Some time ago, I took the risk of asking my wife if I was good looking. Why do you laugh? Well, I was looking for a one-word answer, one particular word in fact. But Barbara gave me a whole paragraph, and I didn't catch that word even once. I'm so grateful that my wife values me despite my looks and being domestically challenged. In Mark's Gospel, a religious academic asks Jesus, what is the most important commandment? Jesus not only told him the most important one, that we should love God with all we are and all we have, Jesus kept on talking and said, and the second most important commandment is this: you shall love your neighbour as yourself. By neighbour, he simply meant those around us. If we're going to have healthy relationships, we need to appreciate and respect the other person. Number 5 is forgiveness. Forgiveness. Did you see the film? Will you admit that you've seen the film Indecent Proposal? $1 million, no questions asked. In the film, David and Diana Murphy are in financial trouble. They go to Vegas to have a shot at winning the money they need. They're approached by a billionaire. If they accept the offer of $1 million from John Gage, their financial worries are over. One night with Diana, nothing more. That's what Gage, Robert Redford, wants in return. Diana, played by Demi Moore, accepts the proposal. But then David and Diana have to rescue their marriage. In one scene, they're thinking back through their relationship that's now in tatters. David says something incredibly profound about their past. He says, "The mistake I made in Vegas was thinking that I could forget what we did. I thought we were invincible. But now I know the things people in love do to each other, they remember." And here's the good bit. And if they stay together, it's not because they forget, but because they forgive. If you have any kind of relationship with a person sitting next to you, they will have hurt you, perhaps deeply. For your relationship to recover and flourish, you'll have to forgive them and not hold that thing against them anymore. Let go. Or there may be people in this church family whom you have hurt. Heal the relationship by saying sorry and ask for forgiveness. If we go back to Mark's Gospel, we see the importance of forgiveness. Jesus says, when you're praying, if you have anything against anyone, forgive them, so that your Father in heaven may forgive your sins. The point is, if we're not forgiving others, we close up our lives and are unable to receive the free forgiveness that God offers us. You should have filled in 5 blanks, I think. We've got a 5-part relational health regime. We put time into the relationship, we give deep commitment, we communicate, we talk to each other, including God, we appreciate or respect the other person and offer and accept forgiveness. The next thing to talk about is the regular checkup. I don't know about you, but a medical checkup is not my idea of fun. First, there's the fasting and the pre-check bloods and sampling. If you haven't drunk enough water, the nurse digs around in your arm looking for this cooperative vein. Then she seems to take gallons of blood. On the day you're weighed and your height's recorded, your pulse rate, blood pressure measured, then the doctor turns up, puts on rubber gloves and starts exploring. Finally, there's the little chat about the numbers and what's to be done. As unpleasant as the regular medical may be, I know that it will likely help me live better or even save my life. A relational checkup may also not be very pleasant, but it may save our relationship. Not long ago, every Friday evening after dinner for over a year, Barbara and I went to Panera. We bought a drink and sat down and chatted for an hour or more. We went slowly through Willard Harley's discussion questions in the His Needs, Her Needs book. It wasn't a very pleasant experience. I learnt things about myself I'd rather not know. But our relationship is better. So can I suggest a 3-part occasional checkup to improve relational health? Number 1, look in the mirror. Ask yourself, do I have a relational health regime? In other words, am I putting in the time? Am I committed, communicating? Am I appreciative and forgiving? Ask, do I need to move on from a relationship? If you're married, that doesn't apply. If you're a parent, that doesn't apply. Number 3, do I need to develop more relationships? That's a question particularly men need to ask. And an important question, is my relationship with God healthy? That question is important both for our personal lives and for the health of our relationships. David Larson was a psychiatrist trained at Duke University. He founded the National Institute for Healthcare Research. Sadly, he died in 2002 at the age of 54. David conducted research on the connection between religious commitment and healthy relationships. His conclusion was that there's a strong and consistent connection between our religious commitment and the health of our relationships. In other words, the greater our commitment to God, the more satisfying our marriage, the healthier the members of the family, and the better everyone's mental health. The conclusion I draw from this is we need to bring to our relationships the resources of a personal life in which God is supplying love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, and self-control, the things necessary to fuel a healthy relationship. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Here's the second part of an occasional relational health checkup. Evaluate together. This doesn't have to be a formal or heavy checkup, but make a date with your wife or husband. Go on a trip with your son and talk about how things are. Ask your friend to meet for coffee. Set up a meeting with a colleague. And when you meet, listen. Be flexible, don't judge. Compromise, say sorry, be content with baby steps. At least that's the theory. Perhaps like you, I don't find this particularly easy. But a healthy relationship depends on occasional, regular evaluations together. Number 3, make the changes. It may be clear in the conversation that your spouse needs more time with you, or that she doesn't appreciate you texting while you're talking with her, or that your daughter doesn't appreciate the way that you speak to her sometimes, or that your colleague does not, in fact, have anything against you, or that your friend has good reason for not contacting you for such a long time. With this kind of information, changes in the way that we think and act can be made. Well, so much for our occasional regular checkup. The third part of our approach to relational health is handling emergencies. What do you do when your wife tells you that she's leaving? Or what do you do when one of your children cuts you out of their life? Or a person that you thought you were going to marry is two-timing you? Or you discover that the person at work is betraying you? Or you discover that a friend has turned on you? What number do you call? Here's what you do. Number 1, seek help. Seek help. We don't always react well in a crisis, so your 911 is going to be your small group leader or a pastor, or you may have a special friend to whom you can call at a time like this. You're not talking with them in order to attack the person who you think's causing the problem. You're seeking ideas as to the way forward. Eleanor Roosevelt said something very sensible. Great minds discuss ideas. Average minds discuss events, and small minds discuss people. Part of seeking help will be crying out to God, asking God for wisdom, strength, and His attitudes of patience and kindness. So we seek help. Then we repair the damage. The repair could be to leave the relationship. While forgiveness is essential, it may also be important for all concerned to sever the relationship with the person. Most repair jobs will likely involve a conversation. Consider having a third person there in the conversation. And insofar as it lies within you, don't criticize. Listen. Admit any wrong. Forgive. Control anger. Talk about how you feel. Compromise. Accept what can't be changed. Be honest. And be careful with your language. For example, sometimes my wife says that I'm stingy. Do you have that word in this country? Well, what she really is admitting that I don't waste money. Or she'll say that I'm pedantic. Of course, she really means that I'm careful and precise in what I say. Or she'll say I'm always interfering. Of course, I'm only trying to help or give advice. I think you would agree that our communication would be a lot better if Barbara didn't use such loaded language. Number 3, maintain your relational health regime. We've already said a lot about that, so we don't need to say any more. So let's conclude. Healthy relationships are important to our well-being. But relationships are among the hardest things that we ever do. We've seen that the answer to relational health is much the same as the answer to physical health. We need a fitness regime, we need regular checkups, and we need to know how to manage the emergency. Each one of us will have different things we need to do in order to bring greater health to our relationships. And we probably can't do much about it now. But we can pray. Maybe if we all stood to pray, that would help. Would you like to stand? And I'll get Barbara to come and stand up with me. If you are, and some of us are here alone today, know that God is standing there with you. And that He wants to be part of transforming you. If you've come with someone who's significant to you, you might like to hold their hand. If you're married, well, try this. The prayer ministry team, do we have a prayer ministry team? The prayer ministry team may like to come out. Please accept their invitation, my invitation, to come and let them pray for you. Let them lay hands on you and ask God to come in His power so that your relationships can be transformed. Well, let's pray. Dear God, thank you for the special people in our lives. Yet some of us are in great pain in our relationships. Please help us. Before you, we forgive that person. We forgive those who have hurt us. And we say that we're no longer going to hold a grudge. We are sorry for the mistakes we are making in our relationships. Please forgive us. Thank you. And some of us need to open up our lives to you so that you can pour into us your forgiveness and love and help. So, we surrender our life to you so that you can forgive and transform us. And so we can be a positive influence in our relationships. Amen.